Hi everybody, it's great to be back here again on It's Friday, and I just want to give a quick message about this week's portion. And this will be a tribute to Nikki, who was a great ambassador to Israel, to the United States. I'm saying for Israel, she's ambassador to the United States, but in reality she was a fighter and a soldier for Israel, and God should bless her and she should continue to succeed in all her future endeavors in politics where she goes, and she will be blessed for sure. And I think this week's portion, the story of the Tower of Babylon, is so connected to her story. And I'll explain to you what I mean by that in a moment. If we look at the story of the Tower of Babylon, it's one of the passages, a difficult passage, to understand what exactly they did that caused them to be scattered and punished. God comes down and he scatters them around the world. But it began by them having a plan. We see them, it says that the whole world was one language and they were unified. A unified, Dvarim Achadim literally means they were unified in their advice and in their counsel. They had one plan. What was their one plan? Their plan was to build a city and tower which could reach the heavens. They wanted to make a name for themselves. In other words, they had a call of arrogance of making a name for themselves, but it doesn't really reveal they wanted to build this tower to the heavens, making a name for themselves. And God coming down meaning to punish them, and the punishment was that he scattered them around the world. They were beforehand unified under one language, Hebrew, just like today the world is unified under English. Then it was Hebrew that unified the people, which was the language that God created the world with. And today the global language again is Lahavdil, is English, right? Anyone who doesn't speak English is in a problem, right? As a major issue, trying to deal with them traveling around the world or communicating with other people. It's important to know language. So we could all identify with that confusion. So what does God do? Well, you all spoke one language. It doesn't mean there weren't other languages that existed then. There were other languages, but God, the major language that unified them was the language the world was created with, the holy language of Hebrew. God said, that's it, I'm going to confuse them, and they were scattered, and then an end to their plan came about. The Midrash, to try to discusses what was their plan exactly. So it was hinted to the fact they wanted to make themselves a name, they wanted to build a tower, a city. What was really behind this whole thing? The Maharal of Prague, one of the famous leaders of Israel, great as far as Torah scholars of Israel, in the 1500s, he talks about that they wanted to actually connect using their black magic and their evil forces to the upper worlds. In other words, they believed that they could use their magic to change the way things happen in the world. What do they want to change? Well, if we think about it, this was a post-flood generation. So after the flood taking place, humanity had a good reason to fear a similar catastrophe. They didn't know if it would happen again. No one knew if a flood would take place. So they felt, you know something? We can interfere with the decrees, the heavenly decrees, by learning about astrology, building an important, using their modern innovation, they can actually try to deal with the problem by having a very powerful, city or towers that they can all hang out in there, maybe hide on top of the towers, perhaps, if another flood would come about. So they were trying to deal and contend with in a modern way with problems with natural catastrophe. In their eyes, they thought this was the way to do it. So God was really upset, and he comes and he scatters them. Now, why was God upset in reality? Because instead of realizing that there's a king of the universe who's behind when things take place in the world and catastrophe, it doesn't mean we shouldn't ready ourselves against natural problems, and God forbid, hurricane forces come in, you have to for sure get out or you protect yourself. And we see a lot of that, unfortunately, people suffering from those terrible hurricanes or floods to this very day. Does it mean we have to sit around and not take care of? Of course not. God forbid. That's not at all the point that we're trying to make here. But the answer is, if you're trying to say that there's no God in the world, that I can literally, it's only me, and take control of the situation, and taking God out of the picture, that's really the source of all the evil. Because here, if we look very closely in the verse, what did the verse say? The verse comes along and says they wanted to make a name for themselves. If we see, it says, what is the word I'm looking for over here? Right, it says, Vayomru, in verse number 4, Vayomru hava, let's build a city in the tower. V'naseh lanu shem, we'll make ourselves a name. So this right away shows they wanted to make themselves a name. They were into the arrogance. They were into making themselves a name. It was all about them. Right? It wasn't really to solve a world problem in a situation where the world needs to, to work on a remedy for a bad disease. But it was all about them. It was all about making themselves a name, a shame. And for that reason, God comes down and he takes away their language, the global language of Hebrew, and he confuses them, and they're scattered all over the world. That was their punishment. Now, it's very interesting. Again, Rashi and other commentaries will bring down a similar vein that they were rebelling against God. Their whole thing was that God doesn't control the world, we're in control of our own destiny, trying to take God out of the picture. Okay, so let's not get it wrong. It's not that we can't protect ourselves from calamity, but we can't take God out of the picture because God is behind everything. And the minute we do that, then it's all about arrogance, it's all about us, and it's not worth anything. And that's really what caused the wrath of God to be unleashed, which was here interesting. They weren't punished like a flood, they weren't wiped out, but they were punished for being scattered around. And here, we should mention the Midrash. King David in Psalms chapter 59, he says something very interesting. He brings down in verse number 6 that he calls out to God and he says, God, you know something? I want you to wake up and punish the nations. But I want because they don't have mercy on them because they sin, and then he goes rebellion, and he goes on to say in verse 12 and 13, he says, but don't kill them. In other words, I don't want you to bring a catastrophe like you did, like a flood upon them. Why? Because I don't want my nation to forget. That's a strange answer. Don't kill them because I don't want my nation to forget. What does that mean? But I want you to shake them around, and I want you to bring them down. And then it talks about a sin of their mouths. Verse 13, Chatat Pimo, Dval Siftemo, the sin of their mouths, they'll be trapped with their pride. What is it referring? What is King David talking about? The reason I'm mentioning King David here is because it's a Midrash Rabbah that talks about these exact verses. And the Midrash says that this is referring to the flood, the generation of the Tower of Babylon, that Israel is asking God not to, after they rebelling against God, but not to wipe them out, but to punish them by bringing them down from their greatness and by scattering them around. And what was the sin of their mouths? Was their rebellion, that they believe that they can go ahead and they can actually be in total control of their destiny with their modern innovation and technology, and totally forget there's a creator of the universe. So here, Israel is saying, God, don't punish them by wiping them out, but scatter them, bring them down from their arrogance. Very interesting. If you look in the Midrash Rabbah, you'll find that explanation. And the Midrash explains that they were saying to themselves that once out of every 1,556 years, there's a flood, because they saw the flood took place at 1,556 years after creation. So they figured they're going to prepare themselves for the next flood, and therefore they're going to build, and Midrash describes them building these. They wanted to build 4 towers, and how to prevent the heavens from falling apart in their own way. The Maral of Prague explains it in some black magic. Obviously, they were trying to do some spiritual things that they can prevent this from happening. Whatever it was, they wanted to interfere with the world, with the way God runs the world, and not giving God any credit, but just saying it's all about them. They have the ability to do it, and they can overcome this. And that's really what caused them to be punished by being scattered. Why weren't they punished by like the generation of the flood that was wiped out? They were just scattered. And the answer is Israel prayed for them not to be punished that way. But King David says, I don't want my nation to forget. And here, that doesn't make sense. What does it mean, I don't want my nation to forget? And I thought of an interesting, perhaps, explanation, getting back to Nikki Haley and what's going on today. We see in the United Nations, if it wasn't for someone like Nikki Haley, who's literally standing on one side against all those who are coming against Israel. So they remind me of a similar Tower of Babylon situation, where the nations of the world are unifying, coming together, but for the wrong reasons again, to show we're in charge. God doesn't have a people, Israel. We can condemn Israel in the United Nations. So the last thing President Obama does is condemn Israel in the United Nations. And then, thank God for a very, very special lady, Nikki Haley, who reminds me of Abraham standing on one side against, she's doing an Abraham activity here, fighting against all those who are trying to condemn Israel. That kind of get-together of the United Nations is supposed to really be for world prosperity and helping the world. We see the opposite. They're getting together to war against Israel from this body of nations to condemn Israel, to try to weaken Israel, and in every possible opportunity they have. That is an exact replica of the Tower of Babylon. If we go on, we can say the European Union is the same thing. The European Union is really obviously behind the United Nations and all that condemning of Israel, and they're unified under their euro, right, with their whole concept of trying to unify themselves, but for what purpose? Everything about the European Union today is to come against Israel. And unfortunately, the BDS and all these organizations that are being supported by the European Union to come against Israel and to try to delegitimize Israel, the right to be in our country and to exist as a nation. This unification is totally a rebellion against God, exactly like the Tower of Babylon. Because they're coming together saying Israel has no right? Because the plan of God to give Israel the country of Israel and to be a light to the nations, they're coming against that whole thing. And that's what King David was saying, don't forget my people. All those liberal Jews that don't realize what's going on in the world, King David is saying, remember, later on, many generations later, I want you to wake up and realize that the world is going to come against Israel with all those nations. Another Tower of Babylon. And I want you to remember, if God would punish the Tower of Babylon and wipe them out, the world would have forgotten about what happened. But now that they were divided and scattered, this is a lesson for all generations. When the future towers will be built, future rebellions will take place against Israel, against God. It's the same thing. You have to be aware of what's behind it. And how to rectify it, of course, more than anything, how to rectify it. So the situation today is a repetition of history. The modern towers of Babylon, and what's going to be the end if they don't shape up and correct themselves? Their arrogance eventually will catch up to them, and they will totally fall apart, and it will be dismantled and scattered. So the European Union will fall apart, and the United Nations are going to fall apart if they don't wake up and realize that we do have the ability to do something good with unification instead of doing something bad with it. And this we see, instead of adopting a love for Israel, who's a true fighter for freedom and democracy, they're supporting extreme Muslims that want to come and bring destruction into the world. That we see so clearly today. Terrorism, every single day we're contending with it here in Israel. We just had a terrible attack this week of 2 people murdered and someone injured, and yesterday right here near Itamar, another one in Samaria, where a soldier was attacked and a woman from a nearby community here was injured. These things take place by Muslim extremism that have one goal: to unify the world on terrorism against Israel. And the world, the European Union, instead of rectifying that, is adopting and supporting them. And that's why they're getting all these refugees in their face, which will eventually bring about their own downfall. And that is exactly the Tower of Babylon. Another way of fighting against God. And instead of saying, Hashem, we accept the fact that you're the leader of the universe. Let's follow your plan. Let's follow your Torah. And that will be the recipe of world success and contending with problems. We can't, God forbid, think we're going to solve all the problems in the world by having this body called the United Nations, world problems, without realizing there's a creator of the universe. And if everything starts and ends with the creator of the universe, we can truly solve problems of the world. That is why I think one of the reasons the Midrash is saying, remember this. Don't forget, remember it. Because you have to know and be very clear and know very, very clearly why the Tower of Babylon, what was so dangerous about this? Why did God punish them so severely? And took place what took place. And we see, I think we can mention that one of the things goes on in the United Nations is everyone's having translators and they're dealing with the problem that there's different nations have different languages. They're trying to deal with all that, with translate all kinds of things. But they're forgetting one of the most important thing is that you can't war against the King of the universe, against his nation, and be successful in life. And that's why a tribute to Nikki Haley, the United States, was standing with Israel. The United States, they're unified today, the country of the world that's unified together with Israel. And that will bring a blessing to the United States. But if God forbid, leaders come later after after Donald Trump leaves office. Hopefully he'll be around for more years, but eventually leaders change. And we have to pray that the United States will continue to stand with Israel, because any country unified and stands with God's people will be blessed. But if, God forbid, that they choose otherwise in the future not to stand with Israel or any other country that's unified against Israel, that will be their downfall. It won't last. It won't work. So the recipe, as we read next week's portion, when Abraham, the nations of the world will be blessed within you. Those who bless Israel will be blessed. Those who curse Israel will be cursed. And it's so clear. Anyway, Shabbat Shalom, B'sarot Tovot, Yeshua P'nechamot.